This program contains coarse language.
They've treated me like a leper. They've ostracised me, left me out in the wilderness to rot.
I'm trying to get better and I have to fight for treatment. I'm not asking for a diamond ring or a new car. I'm asking for treatment.
Australia's workers' compensation system is supposed to be a safety net.
It's not a safety net at all. I just can't believe that it's in this country. I can't believe that it's such a barbaric system.
I felt totally worthless because I was in no state to return to work, and yet they were dropping me from the system.
The schemes are bleeding money, and injured workers and their employers are paying the price.
The decisions that I've seen in our investigations are not only unjust and unreasonable and wrong, some of them are downright immoral and unethical.
With tens of billions of dollars at stake, workers' comp has become a gravy train for insurers and consultants.
You can just imagine how many people and organisations are circling around that pool of money and trying to make a buck out of it.
All these people have their snout in the trough. It's a disaster, a mitigated disaster.
Tonight, in a joint investigation with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Four Corners opens the books on Australia's two biggest workers' compensation schemes. We meet the winners and the losers and examine insider claims of systemic abuse and some scandalous practices. Every day when we head off to work, we trust we'll be looked after if we get hurt on the job. It could happen to any of us. Employers bankroll workers' compensation schemes, paying compulsory premiums to cover medical bills and wages. And the promise is to help workers get back to work.
I was a rubbish sorter for a skip hire company. The skip bins would come in on trucks and they would dump the loads on the factory floor, and we'd sort the rubbish using machinery.
Scott Ginters was at work in 2017 when a terrible accident happened.
We were incredibly busy. There was a lot going on within the factory, and the excavator, the 6 to 7 tonne excavator, started reversing towards me. I was unable to get out of the way fast enough, and it ran over me. It ran over my legs and pelvis. I was able to look directly up underneath the excavator and see the bottom of it. And from that point on, my whole life changed.
Scott's pelvis, lower spine and legs were crushed.
I mean, we were talking about him losing his legs, the possibility of not walking again, and it happened at work, so therefore work cover were going to be involved.
Scott was in hospital for 2 months, then in rehab learning how to walk again. When he eventually came home, his struggle with the workers' compensation system created enormous stress.
I've had problems with getting reimbursement on some bills, delays in getting payments. I've had considerable delays or the stretching of time frames for certain things. You end up feeling like just giving up and letting a lot of those decisions go by the wayside, and because the fight that you have to constantly do is unimaginable. Every day it was a fight, and those periods of time when you weren't fighting, or when I wasn't fighting, I was lying in bed with the doona surrounding me in a cocoon.
Scott's case was handled by Allianz Insurance, one of 5 agents used by the Victorian Government's WorkSafe Authority under its workers' comp scheme, WorkCover. He says it was a constant battle to try to get Allianz to approve the medical treatment he needed.
It was heartbreaking to watch because he would spend any bit of energy trying to get well, but trying to get decisions in his favour, and just at every turn was blocked or denied, or, well, we haven't received that bit of paperwork, or we haven't had this signed off, or no, they haven't approved that.
The only way that they can make money is to save money.
2 years after the accident, Scott was still suffering severe pain and his mental condition had deteriorated. And then came a bombshell.
After careful consideration, based on the information available, your entitlement to weekly payments will cease from the 24th of August 2019.
Scott had been on workers' comp payments for 130 weeks, which meant he'd reached an important milestone in the insurer's performance targets. What Scott didn't know was that agents such as Allianz are paid financial incentives by WorkSafe when they close cases.
I felt totally worthless because I was in no state to return to work, and yet they were dropping me from the system. It put me in a point where I have never been so low or felt so low in my entire life as I had at that point. I became suicidal. I wanted to just throw it all away.
Scott challenged Allianz's decision to terminate him and went before a medical panel.
My physical impairment was 63% and mental was 18%. That's how I was assessed. And they overruled Allianz's decision, and therefore that was final and binding, and I was able to go back onto the system finally.
What we have certainly seen is the gaming of a system for financial incentives. There are a series of moments in time when there is an incentive for the agent to return that worker to work. So they're called return to work incentives. There is an incentive, for example, for somebody to return to work at the 130-week mark. Now, if you're a seriously, and in some cases catastrophically, injured worker, the incentive on the agent is to produce some form of medical evidence that allows them to terminate the claim at that point. There is an incentive for them to do that.
Victorian Ombudsman Deborah Glass has conducted 2 separate investigations into WorkSafe. She found agents were doctor shopping and cherry-picking evidence to terminate claims.
Within my legislation, I can express an opinion that something is unreasonable, unjust, or wrong. What I saw was, in some of those cases, was downright immoral and unethical.
And systemic.
And systemic.
The Ombudsman examined internal emails that reveal how some insurance agents treat the people they're supposed to be protecting. In one email, a staffer encourages workmates to deliberately use a doctor with a record of rejecting claims. 2 outcomes that I've done in the last 2 days, resulting in terminations of claims from one doctor, Dr. X. Can we please use him more?
What does that tell you?
This isn't a person. This is a number. This is a target. Let's close down this claim. Let's ignore the fact that there is a suffering human being involved in this. Let's find any excuse to make our numbers, to make some money.
The correspondence lays bare how insurance agents are rewarded if they meet set targets to kick people off the system. In this email, they had their eye on a hefty bonus. We cannot take our foot off the accelerator, as maximum reward for this measure is currently worth $687,000. We can do this.
What did you think when you saw those sort of emails?
It just proves the point, doesn't it? That this is not about people's lives, it's about money. It's about how can we make some more money out of these claims by let's get rid of them, let's terminate them, let's make sure we hit those targets.
I just felt like I was worthless. Like I wasn't like, oh, if she dies, who cares? You know, great, she'll be off our books. Another one off.
Chris Iliopoulos was working in a homeware store in Melbourne when she hurt her back moving furniture.
The pain was excruciating. It was like someone was constantly doing this up and down your spine with a knife. But yet you had no feeling in your legs, but then you'd get these shots of electricity and but they just wouldn't move. They didn't want to do anything.
Chris's doctors recommended back surgery.
It was getting to the point where even though Chris's treating doctors and very senior doctors at well-known, reputable clinics who were recommending treatment were being ignored by the insurance company managing Chris's claim. And even though those doctors were writing saying that she needed this treatment to try to regain some of her ability to carry out her activities of daily living, the insurance company would not pay for it. It got to the point where I had to be involved liaising with the insurance company to try to get more medical evidence so that she could have treatment.
The insurance agent eventually approved her surgery, but her excruciating pain persisted. Her specialist recommended intensive pain relief treatment, but once again, there were lengthy delays.
All they kept saying to me is like, you have to wait until we get the okay. They're still having meetings about it.
It was clear by late 2017 that the insurance company was taking steps to terminate her weekly payments. She was approaching 130 weeks on weekly payments, and that is a trigger point for someone's claim being investigated. Each time a treating practitioner provided a report, the insurance company got an independent medical report to say the contrary.
At 130 weeks, she was terminated.
She had reached the stage where she simply could not cope in this system anymore because she was not being believed. Her doctors were not being believed. And I think she felt entirely overwhelmed that she was at the mercy of an insurance company who would make decisions contrary to her well-being at almost every turn.
So she tried to kill herself?
She did, and she was found by her daughter and she was taken to hospital.
We thought an injury, it can be fixed, but there's just so much damage left behind from in her mind and in our minds and in our life. It's just like, yeah, that's the hardest part, I think, just getting over it. Yep.
Chris went before a medical panel to appeal her termination, and the decision was reversed. She was later awarded a lump sum payment.
Who's going to be held accountable for this, you know? If I don't speak out now, who's going to say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing, and people are, suffering because of it.
People have forgotten or failed to recognise they're dealing with people. This is about people's lives. This is about human suffering. And what you see are references to numbers and files and claims.
I advised a lot of governments around Australia in my career around workers' compensation schemes in just about all states of Australia. I used to do all the numbers to calculate the premiums, get financial advice. I never met claimants at all. Met a few lawyers, but you don't actually see the impact it has on people's lives until you actually meet the people and see and hear their story.
Peter McCarthy spent 35 years inside the workers' comp system as a key financial advisor for major firms and regulators.
Hi Greg. How are you today?
Now retired, he does charity work taking food to people in financial stress.
I bought a couple of hampers here for you.
Thank you very much.
Some have been thrown off the workers' compensation system.
Some Woolies vouchers.
Thank you very much.
Do you want a hand taking the stuff in?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind. They're really heavy.
A workers' comp claim, in my experience, can be an extremely emotional and traumatic period of a person's life. And people need to have a lot of empathy with the person they're dealing with.
Through his volunteering, Peter met Greg Damon, who's been unable to do his job after a serious injury on a construction site more than a decade ago.
I had chronic pain. So pain up my neck on the left side, the side of my head on the left side, down my arm, and down my torso, and also down my leg. I get flare-ups, so it sort of goes up and down all the time. It's constantly there.
He used to ring up and ask for help in paying his bills, like electricity. He didn't have enough money to buy food, so we'd go around and take hampers and give him food vouchers.
Greg Damon was thrown off workers' comp payments in 2017 as part of reforms to make the New South Wales scheme financially viable.
I've got mental health problems now. I don't know what my future's going to be. It doesn't just affect my work life, it affects my whole life. It affects my social life. I'm single, which I don't really want to be single, but I've said to myself, no woman would want to be with someone like me that hasn't got a future.
Do you think the system let him down?
Absolutely let him down to a terrible extent. It's ruined his life. It's ruined his financial well-being, and it's ruined him socially, and he's very depressed about it.
Icare Workers Insurance protects more than 320,000 businesses.
In New South Wales, Icare is the principal workers' compensation authority. It was set up by the state government in 2015 to replace the old work cover scheme, which had racked up a $4 billion deficit.
We care for more than 60,000 injured workers each year.
When you hear the word Icare, what do you think?
I cringe. I don't like the word Icare. What a name. They don't care. They just don't care.
When Icare was established, the New South Wales government got rid of long-term injured workers like Greg Damon to wipe the deficit.
Their benefits were cut off after 5 years. And that had a huge financial impact on the scheme. It went from basically a $4 billion deficit to a $4 billion surplus at June 2015. That's a huge impact.
Icare is chaired by Liberal Party donor and businessman Michael Carapiet. He was appointed by Treasurer Dominic Perrottet and is on his Business Advisory Committee.
So do you want to just sit down?
Yes.
Icare's CEO is John Nagle, a former executive in the insurance arm of retail giant Wesfarmers. He was one of the architects of Icare's workers' compensation model.
When I was first asked to consider the concept of Icare, I was fascinated. I actually started as a young kid as a government insurer doing workers' compensation claims. And to come back some 38 years later and find that not much had changed, I have to say, appalled me. It was outdated, it was outmoded. It was a fascinating challenge on how to run a transformation and the amount of effort that we've needed to put in to make the changes that we've had to drive. So I'm actually incredibly pleased.
From the start, there were concerns that the people running Icare didn't have the right experience. Key executives were recruited from Wesfarmers Insurance, which specialised in home and business policies. Insiders call them the Wesfarmers Club.
It seems from looking at the people who are in there, a lot of people came from Wesfarmers. These people, if you go and look at their CVs, they have practically no experience in workers' compensation.
You've been asked about Wesfarmers connections in Parliament. Is it usual to recruit so many people from the one organisation?
I'm not quite sure what you're saying here, but the reality is, I've worked in the insurance industry this is my 44th year. I know lots of people in lots of organisations, and I've worked in a number. In terms of Wesfarmers was sold to IAG. A number of those people went to other organisations and then became available. If they've got talent, they go through the appropriate process. If they're selected, I'm very comfortable with that.
From January 1, 2018, lodging a new notification of an injury in New South Wales will be a whole lot easier.
Icare introduced a slick new computer-driven claims model to assess and triage injured workers.
You will be prompted throughout. Simply fill in the claim details about the injury by following the prompts on screen. There are hints and tips to help.
In most cases, technology replaced human contact.
The idea was to save money on claims handling, that largely claims would be managed automatically. They'd be assessed and graded as they came in, and then largely handled by a logarithm rather than individual connections with a claims manager. And what we saw with that was a literal disaster.
They seem to have introduced a claims model which would work really well for a car insurance claim or a home claim or a commercial property. It would work, but it just does not work for workers' comp. Workers' comp claims are totally different to a home or car claim.
The logic that we had in introducing the model is that 45% of claims are just not complex. They are simple sprains or strains or minor injuries where we felt that people didn't necessarily need a case manager assigned to them from day one. And as long as the process was explained, that they could find and navigate their own way through the process.
Under Icare, all new claims were outsourced to a single insurance agent, EML.
Obviously, Icare were looking for a partner to join with them in developing a world-class claim service model. We're very excited that they picked EML to be that one, which I think is a reflection.
New South Wales has the biggest workers' compensation scheme in the country, and the entity that was chosen to manage it all was one of the smallest. I mean, it came entirely out of left field, and indeed, it came in circumstances where EML hadn't been able to deliver on that kind of work in a much smaller statutory scheme in South Australia. I don't think it was just me that was surprised. I think the entire industry was surprised that Icare thought EML had the capacity or ability to do that job.
In South Australia, EML had been investigated and castigated over its poor handling of claims. It was also criticised in a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry in 2016 over its tactics in pursuing injured workers.
What we saw in South Australia was a lot of employers becoming disgruntled. again, feeling that they weren't heard, feeling they didn't have a say in the process. And this is similar to what we've seen the last couple of years in New South Wales.
The whole point of workers' comp schemes is to get people back to work. It's what makes the system financially viable. On this critical measure, it's failing.
The performance by Icare has been unacceptable. In January 2018, and for many years before that, for example, 6 months after an injury, only 1 in 10 workers was not back at work. It's now 2 in 10. It's now 2 in 10. That's thousands of workers. It's unacceptable.
Carmel Donnelly, who heads up the New South Wales Government Workers' Comp regulator, says Icare's poor return to work rate has pushed up the cost of medical expenses.
The costs of extra health care, the costs of extra weekly benefits increase the liabilities for the scheme and ultimately lead to higher premiums.
What about return to work rates? That's been plunging.
What we concentrated on was sustainable return to work, making sure that workers recovered, returned to work and were still there 3 months later. So we anticipated that we would go backwards a little bit, but we went back further than we anticipated, and we've been working with our service providers to close that gap ever since.
It's a complete disaster. There are now, after 26 weeks, more than double the number of people still off work. They haven't been able to get back to work. And that, as a result, is creating a financial disaster. And a rough rule of thumb, if you have double the number of people off work around that time, your cost of your scheme doubles.
Last year, Icare's workers' compensation scheme recorded a loss of $874 million. Since 2015, it's blown more than $3 billion.
It's definitely a grave concern. There are performance around return to work and about finance is unacceptable, the financial position. There needs to be action.
The New South Wales opposition recently obtained a tranche of internal government documents relating to Icare. Peter McCarthy helped Four Corners sift through the massive document dump.
This is really interesting. There's been a huge increase in site claims.
The documents reveal multiple warnings about a looming financial disaster. As early as June 2018, Treasury notes the regulator has become increasingly concerned about the financial viability of the workers' insurance scheme. A year later, the regulator warns Treasury the capital position has deteriorated significantly. And earlier this year, the regulator tells Treasury officials liabilities are now greater than their assets by $459 million. Also buried in the pile is a Treasury note from March saying the fund's solvency is at risk.
The scheme is heading for a financial disaster, and it was heading for a financial disaster before the COVID pandemic hit. As it is, for the last few years, the surplus has been dwindling. It's only now a matter of time before the scheme plunges in deficit. When that happens, Icare or the government will try to either cut benefits further and make injured workers pay for these mistakes, or increase premiums on employers and make employers pay for these mistakes.
Peter McCarthy believes it's even worse than the documents indicate.
I'm saying the liabilities are undercooked by about $6 billion. Money they don't have.
Does the fund have solvency issues?
Some funder hasn't any solvency issues. Look, solvency can be measured in many ways. In a political sense, it's very narrow. It's a funding ratio, which is merely a point-in-time exercise. As I mentioned before, when you look at the risk of ruin, we know that we're ample funds for the next 10 years if we do nothing.
So you're not concerned at all at the finances of Icare?
Not particularly. I'm always concerned about the next 100 years, the next 40 years. That's the period we have to consider.
Just to interrupt you, Treasury has written notes saying that Icare has a overly optimistic view of its finances. Isn't that another polite way of saying spin?
I don't believe so. I haven't seen the note from Treasury. So, yes, we may have a bias towards positivity, but I don't think that bias towards positivity is silly. It's just a reality that, we are a unique organisation. Any of the large fund schemes in Australia have the same scenario. We invest for the long haul, we price our products for the long haul.
Also revealed in the documents is another debt bomb. A Treasury briefing note from March this year reveals 52,000 people have been underpaid an estimated $80 million in claims benefits.
That would rank as one of the biggest wage underpayment scandals that Australia has seen, and it certainly is the biggest example of underpayment in Australia by an Australian government.
How long will it take to repay the workers?
We believe it's a massively complex issue, so at least another 6 months. We're now ready to contact workers who we've identified. But the number is, we believe, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 workers are actually impacted.
So you're challenging the $80 million?
Absolutely.
Despite the massive losses, remuneration for Icare's executives has risen exponentially.
So in 2015, prior to Icare being created, there were 2 people who had an average salary of $305,000. 2 people. They now have 45 people, a 22-fold increase in number of executives who receive, on average, $300,000 or more. So the total remuneration has increased from $611,000 in 2015 to now almost $18 million. That is a 30-fold increase in the salaries of senior executives in Icare. That's just unbelievable.
A confidential Treasury briefing says Icare's executive team is likely the highest paid in the New South Wales government sector.
Just turning to salaries, can you tell me how much you earn?
Look, my salary and all the salaries in Icare are determined by our board.
No, I'm asking how much you earn.
We're not part of the government employment sector, so our board has actually determined our salary
And what
range.
is that salary?
I'm not releasing that on public television. I don't need to.
Senior executives are also paid bonuses if they meet so-called customer satisfaction targets.
What about bonuses? Did you get your full bonus last year?
I didn't get a full bonus last year, no.
How about this year?
I don't know. The board will make that determination once the accounts are finalised in normally August, September.
Given the performance of Icare, do you believe it's appropriate to get a bonus?
As I say, the board assesses us against everything we do in Icare.
Questions are also being asked about how Icare awards contracts.
So I checked the database and I saw that on one day, Icare listed 181 contracts on the public database, 170 of which never went to tender. I've never seen any government agency list so many contracts on one day in breach of the law, and I've never seen any government agency report this many contracts not going to tender.
In 2016, Icare awarded a contract without a tender to a small New Zealand company to develop a tool to measure customer satisfaction.
I don't understand why they had to go to New Zealand to actually find someone to implement it in Icare in New South Wales, when there's lots of firms who actually can do that.
Icare consultant Tony Pescott managed the project, which was worth $11 million. A year after the contract was signed, he lodged a conflict of interest form, stating that his son owned the New Zealand firm. Company searches by Four Corners revealed there was more to it. At the time Tony Pescott signed the Conflict of Interest Declaration, he was a major shareholder in his son's company, Perceptive.
That's a huge governance issue and conflict of interest. How on earth Icare let that happen is just unbelievable.
Tony Pescott told Four Corners he held shares on behalf of a family trust and received no financial benefit. You signed off on Tony Pescott's Conflict of Interest Declaration. Were you aware he owned shares in Perceptive?
I wasn't aware that he owned shares. I was aware that his son was at Perceptive. And when I discussed it with him, we decided that he should declare that he had an interest, or his son was at Perceptive, and that's what the Conflict of Interest Declaration was about.
But he actually, if you did a company search, you'd find he also owned shares in the company.
I understand that that was at a later date.
It was in September 2016.
Yeah. Oh, I'll accept that. We registered a conflict. If that wasn't declared, it wasn't declared.
Icare later told Four Corners that in 2018, the New South Wales anti-corruption watchdog ICAC asked about Tony Pescott's relationship with Perceptive. Icare said the watchdog subsequently decided it wouldn't make any further inquiries. Four Corners understands there have been concerns with other contracts awarded by Icare. A 2016 compliance report rated some processes high risk. Some disclosure practices breached the law. Have you had to refer anything to ICAC?
So, more broadly, I can say yes, I have, and I'm very proactive in, if I believe there's reasonable grounds to need to report to ICAC, I do. I don't hesitate. The ICAC guidance is that when you do that, you keep it confidential. I'm not going to go into detail. It's not appropriate for me to comment about where they are. But over the times that I've been Chief Executive, there have been matters that I've reported to ICAC, and I will continue to be proactive about that.
Are you aware that the regulator has referred some matters relating to Icare to ICAC?
I'm not aware that they've referred that.
I'm one individual going up against an entire system. They've got billions of dollars behind them. They've got unlimited resources. And what do I have? I have absolutely nothing. I'm trying to fight against, all these multiple parties all at the same time whilst dealing with a mental incapacity. It's like being in a boxing match with one arm tied behind my back.
Brett Fitzpatrick is on a mission to expose how the workers' comp system is stacked against workers. The former prison guard and two of his colleagues lodged a claim of bullying and harassment by their employer, Corrective Services. A series of doctors agreed Brett had suffered a work-related psychological injury.
Unbeknown to me at the time, my employer had instructed the insurer to decline the claims.
A forensic investigation by consulting giant KPMG revealed the tactics used to reject the prison guard's claim. The report documented a conversation where Corrective Services told the insurer the claim should be declined, so the claimant would be left short of money and has to return to work due to financial hardship. Sometimes it's cruel to be kind and gotta hit them in the pocket, and when he's not getting any money and he's married with kids and most probably his own home, he's most probably got to think, well, fuck's sake, I've got to do this. QBE replies, yeah, I think he's close to that now.
My employer and the insurer were just openly talking and laughing about the fact that they were going to decline these claims and how they would go about doing it. That to me indicates that this perhaps is systemic. They didn't try to hide it at all. They're playing with people's mental health, and to them it's just a game.
We've been told the draft report was watered down.
Well, if you take out speculation and rumour, you'd have a change in the report. The earlier version, my understanding of that report, the reason there were two reports, the first version contained information that was basically just hearsay. So we asked KPMG to just stick to the facts that were actually available, and so they had to amend their report.
Do you think, from what you've heard of him, that he's been grossly mistreated?
I've ordered an investigation, a comprehensive investigation and claims audit into his claim and some others. It's a very thorough investigation.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times in the last 5 years I've been knocked down. And as the years go on, the more times you get knocked down, the longer it takes to get back up.
All of this has taken a huge toll on Brett Fitzpatrick. He uses a cold water immersion breathing technique to help deal with his depression and anxiety.
Once you go into the cold water, you're not thinking about your case anymore. Your mind just becomes pure. All you're thinking about is how cold it is. I'm not thinking about the outcomes of my case. I can stop the voice in my head that's strategizing and trying to plan the outcomes and possible scenarios in the future. It centers you.
Icare is shaping up as one of the country's worst financial bungles. In 5 short years, it's blown billions of dollars of employers' premiums, yet its management team appears tone-deaf to criticism. So who's ultimately in charge of Icare? Who's calling the shots here?
Ultimately, the Icare board is responsible for Icare, and they're quite an independent organisation.
Who is responsible for the board? Is there someone in charge who can actually get rid of the board?
My understanding is that it's their responsible minister who appoints the board.
So the Treasurer?
And they report to the Treasurer.
The government, I think, has no choice but to sack the board, and they need to put a new board in there and get people who actually understand this business. That new board needs to sack the executive team at Icare and get some people in there who actually understand the business and how to manage claims and unwind this disaster, this mess.
With Icare drowning in red ink, Peter McCarthy believes employers will be tapped for more money.
Employers' premiums are probably going to have to at least double to fund the problem. That's a huge impost on the current New South Wales economy when it's really struggling from the coronavirus impact, the bushfires. It's money, if they increase the premiums to this extent, a lot of the employers will go out of business.
If employers are forced to pay higher premiums for deteriorating outcomes, they'll be forced to close down. There'll be a point where they cannot continue to cover those costs and operate. Employers run this country. They keep it going. They provide work for our workforce. They put food on people's tables. They put roofs over people's heads. With what's going on at the moment, we will need every employer operating to get us out of the situation we've been put in through COVID-19.
Four Corners also understands Icare recently proposed to aggressively remove the number of people covered under its workers' comp scheme. Have you heard that Icare earlier this year were calling insurance agents to target up to 13,000 workers who've been on workers' comp for up to 2.5 years under a section of the law?
I have recently heard that.
It's the first I've ever heard of that.
Carmel Donnelly is aware of it.
I'm not sure where she's got that information from. There wouldn't be 13,000 workers who would be eligible to have that application applied to them. I don't understand where that information would come from.
The workers' comp safety net is being undermined by greed and broken promises. Regulators with too few powers and governments too slow to reform. This is a system in crisis. Injured workers are getting sicker and employers are left holding the bill.
I think people need to be able to trust that all the organisations in the system are there to support injured workers.
I think the turnaround needs to happen. It needs to be paid urgent attention. We need to help people recover, get back to work, get back to their life. The performance of Icare is a grave concern to me. Absolutely a grave concern.
It could be any one of us. Anybody could find themselves in this position. Workers' comp is meant to be a safety net. It is part of that social obligation by the state to ensure that people who are injured at work are not only appropriately compensated but appropriately incentivised to go back to the workplace. It's vital that we get this right.
If this program raised concerns for you or someone you know, please call Lifeline on 131114.